We've been told since childhood that money makes the world go round. But what if that isn't true? What if it isn't money but something hidden inside money that quietly decides who is? Every empire you know, the Roman Republic, the Ottomans, the British Empire, the United States, all of them were shaped, stretched, or shattered by a force so ordinary that we barely question it. A force we use daily, signed without reading, and often misunderstand entirely. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the secret history of interest, the quiet mathematical engine that has owned kings, toppled governments, and today quietly governs every mortgage, credit card, and national debt. And somewhere along the way, interest stopped serving the world, and the world began serving interest. But to understand how that happened, we must travel back much farther than you think. Interest didn't start in banks, because banks didn't exist. It began almost 5,000 years ago, not as a tool of wealth, but as a tool of survival. Imagine the first farmers in ancient Mesopotamia. They borrow grain in the spring when hunger is sharpest and pay it back after the harvest. But since grain multiplies as it grows, lenders asked for repayment, plus a little extra. That little extra was the birth of interest. It seemed harmless, logical, even. But this tiny mathematical twist created something the world had never seen before. Debt that grows faster than people can pay it back. And once civilizations realized this, everything changed. To understand the twists, the consequences, and the modern parallels, we have to follow the cause and effect chain that began thousands of years ago and never really stopped. In ancient Sumer, interest rates weren't 5% or 10%. They were often 33% on barley, 20% on silver, year after year. Unforgiving. At first, it worked. Farmers repaid loans, cities grew, trade expanded. But something strange happened. Within only a few decades, the math broke society. Debts grew so fast that ordinary families could never escape them. When they couldn't pay, lenders seized land, livestock, and then their children. It reached a breaking point so severe that Sumerian kings had to invent something new: debt forgiveness. A royal proclamation, wiping loans clean to prevent social collapse. But every time they forgave the debt, interest would quietly start again. Slow at fierce, harmless at first until it wasn't. And that pattern will repeat throughout all of history. Fast forward to ancient Greece. This was the birthplace of philosophy, democracy, and a brutal form of debt. Families who couldn't pay were chained to the land, forced into work indefinitely. A generation of Athenians was suffocating under debt slavery until one man changed everything. Solon, a poet, a lawmaker, a reluctant revolutionary, Solon abolished debt bondage and famously declared Sysakthia, shaking off of burdens. It saved Athens for a while. Yet even Solon warned, interest grows by night when men are sleeping. And again, after a brief calm, interest rebuilt the same inequalities it had just erased. Then Rome arrived. Rome was more organized, more disciplined, more ruthless, and Roman creditors perfected something devastating: compound interest. The rich got richer. The poor sank deeper. Veterans returned from war to find their farms seized. Revolts quietly simmered. Eventually, debt fueled the very instability that helped push Rome toward collapse. And as Roman power faded, something new stepped onto the stage: the church. For nearly 1,000 years, medieval Europe treated interest like a moral poison. It was outlawed, condemned, described as a sin, called usury, charging for time that belongs only to God. But banning interest didn't eliminate it. It simply pushed it underground. Merchants created loopholes. Contracts used coded language. Money rentals replaced loans. Jewish communities, barred from many other professions, became intermediaries in Europe's hidden credit system. And in this underworld of unofficial finance, something unexpected happened. Interest became powerful precisely because it was forbidden. It became risky and profitable. It funded wars and crusades. It bankrolled kings. Then came the twist. Europe changed its mind. The Renaissance made money respectable again. Trade exploded. Cities wanted growth. Bankers like the Medici became power brokers. Interest was reborn, legal, and normalized. And that rebirth created the world we live in today. The next chapter happens fast, because once interest is unleashed, it accelerates. Venice, Amsterdam, London. These cities used credit to build the world's first financial superstates. Interest allowed them to fight longer wars, build larger navies, and dominate global trade. The British Empire didn't conquer the world with soldiers alone. It conquered with bonds and interest-bearing loans. Governments realized something crucial with interest. You can borrow from the future to control the present. But interest also meant the future had a price. Every pound borrowed demanded more pounds later. Nations owed creditors. And creditors began to influence policy, politics, and priorities. This is where interest quietly began to own the world. But the story doesn't end there. Because interest had one more transformation left, so bigotry shaped the global economy. By the 20th century, interest wasn't just something governments used. It was something they depended on. World War I, financed by debt. World War II, debt again. The Cold War, debt. Debt. That? The pastor boom? Mortgages, business loans, consumer credit, more debt. Credit became the fuel of the entire economy. But here's the twist the world didn't see coming. When an economy requires constant debt to function, interest becomes the master, not the servant. By the 1970s, inflation surged. Countries borrowed to keep up. Central banks responded by raising interest rates to historic highs. And that's when the breaking point hit. In 1982, Mexico announced it couldn't pay its debt. Dozens of nations followed. The lost decade of Latin America began. The world saw what happened when interest outgrew the ability to pay. And yet, nothing truly changed. Because something bigger was beginning. In the 1990s and 2000s, global finance tried to solve the interest problem by creating more credit, more complex loans, and more ways to borrow money that didn't look like borrowing. Securitization. Derivatives. Sub. Prime. Mortgages. Endless refinancing. Interest was no longer a simple percentage. It became a network, a system, a machine. And in 2008, that machine exploded. Banks collapsed. Markets froze. Entire nations teetered on bankruptcy. Governments responded the only way they could. Lower interest rates. Lower. Until eventually, near zero. And in some places, negative. The hope was simple. Cheap money would revive the economy. The unintended effect? Cheap money created record-breaking global debt, bigger than any in human history. Household debt. Corporate debt. Government debt. Interbank debt. Everything is leveraged. Everything is borrowed. Today, interest doesn't just influence the world. It owns it. Let's look at where the world stands now. Global debt has crossed $300 trillion, more than 3 times the world's GDP. Over 70% of households in developed nations hold interest-bearing debt. Many nations spend more on interest payments than on education, infrastructure, or defense. The United States now spends hundreds of billions per year just on interest than the cost of multiple government agencies combined. The pattern is the same one we saw in Sumer, Athens, Rome, medieval Europe, and the British Empire. Interest starts small. It accelerates growth. It outgrows the economy. The burden becomes unsustainable. Crisis, reset, repeat. We keep reliving the same cycle because the math behind interest never changed. Only the scale did. After 5,000 years, what have we learned? 1. Interest is a tool, but it becomes a master if left unchecked. Every civilization that relied heavily on interest eventually found the math catching up with them. Compounding doesn't care about fairness, politics, or promises. 2. Debt is not the problem. Exponential growth is. Debt can build nations, but only when the real economy grows faster than the interest owed. When it doesn't, collapse. It's only a matter of time. 3. The modern world is replaying ancient patterns at global scale. For the first time, the entire planet is synchronized in the same interest-based system. And that means the next reset, whatever form it takes, won't be regional. So here's the real question. Are we living at the end of another interest cycle? The same kind that toppled past civilizations? Or is the world about to reinvent money itself with digital currencies, AI-managed credit, or financial systems we can't yet imagine? The answer is still being written. But one thing is certain. Interest has shaped humanity for 5 millennia. and its story is far from over. If this deep dive helped you see the world a little differently, hit that like button, it really helps the channel. Subscribe for more long-form stories that peel back the layers of history, economics, and power. And in the comments, tell me this. Do you think humanity can escape the interest cycle, or is it built into our future forever? Thanks for watching. See you in the next episode.